Never start a war with humans, they'll annihilate you. The first mistake. It began with a single, arrogant assumption. The Vrake Dominion had conquered 12 species, crushed a dozen fleets, and laid waste to every resistance that had ever stood against them. To the rest of the galaxy they were an unrelenting force of destruction, unstoppable, merciless, absolute. And then they made the mistake of invading Earth. Admiral Zypher of the Vraked Armada stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Oblivion Spear, watching the fragile blue planet rotate beneath him. A sneer curled across his elongated, obsidian-black face as he watched the feeble attempts at planetary defense rise from the surface. Missile batteries fired into the sky. Fighter jets screamed upward, desperate and defiant. The humans fought as all species did when the Dominion arrived, blindly, foolishly. Pathetic, Zypher muttered. Initiate orbital bombardment. The command was given, and in an instant, the sky above Earth ignited with the fury of the Vraked. Plasma lances, kinetic impactors, and high-energy bombardment rained down upon the surface. Entire city blocks vanished in blinding eruptions of fire and shockwaves. The atmosphere churned with burning clouds, and screams of panic filled every intercepted human transmission. It was supposed to be over quickly. It was always over quickly. But then, something changed. A single transmission cut through the chaos, overriding every frequency. It wasn't a plea. It wasn't a surrender. It was a promise. A deep, controlled voice echoed through the comms of every Vraked vessel. You should have killed us all. The transmission ended. Admiral Zypher barely had time to process it before his sensors lit up with something he had never seen before. Not in all his years of galactic conquest. Human ships were coming. And they were moving faster than anything the Vraked had ever encountered. The counterattack. The Dominion had superior numbers. Their ships were bigger, their weapons more advanced. The fleet stationed above Earth was enough to obliterate half a star system. But they had never fought humans before. The first warning came as a Vraked destroyer, the Grasp of Ruin, vanished from sensors. No impact, no explosion, just gone. The second warning came when their defensive formations collapsed as something slipped through their shields like they weren't even there. Then the alarms blared. Borders. The Vraked had not even considered the possibility. How could humans breach a fully armored battleship in the void of space? It was impossible. And yet, it was happening. Security footage from the first breach showed only glimpses, blurs of motion, flickers of light, the sudden, jerking collapse of a Vraked soldier as something struck within human speed. The corridors of the Oblivion Spear ran red with Vraked blood, and a rising sense of panic spread through the fleet. They're inside the ship. They're inside the ship. One officer screamed before his transmission cut off in a wet, gurgling noise. Admiral Zypher turned to his tacticians. How? Unknown, Supreme One, one officer stammered. They moved too fast. We can't track them. That was when the humans started talking to them. One by one, the Vraked ships received private transmissions. Messages from deep within their own vessels. You should have killed us all. Now we kill you. There is no escape. One by one, the Dominion's warships went dark. Their engines died. Their weapons systems failed. And then, in the vast emptiness of space, the screaming started. The monster inside the walls. It took Admiral Zypher precisely 17 minutes to realize they had already lost. Reports flooded in, ships torn apart from the inside, entire squads disappearing into the dark, their last moments filled with garbled transmissions of gunfire and something else. Something the humans were using that couldn't be explained. Stealth? No. The Vraked had fought stealth units before. This was different. This was psychological warfare. The humans were not just killing them. They were breaking them. Veteran warriors, creatures who had slaughtered entire species without hesitation, were begging for mercy over open comms. We surrender. We surrender. The humans did not respond. Please? Please. A single gunshot silenced the message. Zypher's claws trembled. He had never seen a force fight like this. Not just with overwhelming might, but with an understanding of fear. They didn't just want victory. They wanted revenge. And that was when he heard it. Footsteps. Inside the bridge. The elite guards at his side turned, weapons raised. But it didn't matter. It was already too late. The shadows moved. And humanity struck. The fall of the Oblivion Spear. Admiral Zypher barely had time to react before his personal guards were ripped apart in front of him. The bridge, once a sanctum of power and control, became a slaughterhouse in a matter of seconds. The humans moved like specters, too fast for the eye to track, too efficient to be anything but monsters in human form. A blur of motion, One of his guards shrieked as his head was yanked backward at an unnatural angle, followed by the sickening crunch of a shattered spine. Another raised his plasma rifle, only for a human shape to emerge from the dark, wrapping an arm around the soldier's throat and plunging a blade between his armored plates. The screams were wet, the deaths silent. Sci stumbled back, talons grasping for his sidearm as a massive human stepped into the dim glow of the bridge. Not an assassin. A soldier. His armor was black as the void, dented and scarred from past battles. His eyes were hidden behind the visor of his helmet, but Sci could feel the hatred radiating from him. You should have killed us all. It was the same voice from before. The same voice that had haunted every transmission since this nightmare had begun. Sci aimed his sidearm, but the human was already moving. A gunshot rang out. Pain erupted in Sci's shoulder as the force of the impact sent him sprawling onto the cold metal floor. He gasped, clutching at the wound, staring in disbelief at the dark crimson blood oozing between his claws. He had never been shot before. Not once. The human loomed over him, weapon still smoking. This is what war with humans looks like, the soldier said, his voice emotionless. Pain. Sci's mouth opened, to beg, to lie, to stall, when the human grabbed him by the throat and lifted him off the ground. The Admiral's talons scrabbled uselessly against the soldier's armor, but the grip was unbreakable. The human leaned in close, his voice now a whisper. You made a mistake, he said. And now your species will pay for it. And with that he let go. Sci crashed to the floor, gasping for breath. By the time he looked up, the human was already gone. The bridge of the Oblivion Spear was silent. And outside, the Dominion's fleet was dying. The end of an empire. The wrecked ships had been decimated. What had started as a conquest had become an execution. Human vessels, small, fast, merciless, moved like predators among the wreckage, striking without warning, without hesitation. Escape pods were targeted. No survivors. No mercy. Dominion battleships, once proud and mighty, now floated lifeless in the void, their crews slaughtered. Others were left intact, their comms channels hijacked, their remaining officers forced to listen to the screams of their dying comrades before their ships were incinerated. A single transmission cut through the chaos. Admiral Sci is dead. A lie. But the Dominion forces didn't know that. Panic spread like wildfire. A commander on the Dagger of Supremacy, the second largest warship in the fleet, barked desperate orders into his comms. Retreat. All forces retreat. Fall back to. The transmission cut off. A moment later, the Dagger of Supremacy detonated from within. Self-destruct? No. Borders. The humans had gotten inside. And then, one by one, the remaining Dominion ships began vanishing from the battlefield. Not exploding. Not retreating. Just disappearing. Nowhere left to run. Sci limped through the corridors of his dying flagship, his mind racing. He had to escape. Had to warn the High Dominion. Had to tell them the truth. The humans weren't just soldiers. They weren't just warriors. They were something far worse. They were hunters. And the wrecked were now their prey. He reached the escape pod bay, clawing at the control panel with shaking hands. The doors hissed open. Salvation. He stumbled inside, sealing the hatch, and slammed the launch button. The pod rocketed away from the ruined flagship, plunging toward the swirling expanse of space. He activated the distress beacon. He had survived. He could still. Thump. His blood turned to ice. A sound. A noise that should have been impossible. Something was inside the escape pod with him. Slowly, Sci turned his head. And there, in the shadows of the small, confined space, was a human. The same soldier from the bridge. Helmet removed now. Cold, merciless eyes staring back at him. Sci opened his mouth to scream. The human raised his gun. And pulled the trigger. The hunters become the hunted. Sci never even felt the bullet. One moment he was staring into the abyss of human hatred, and the next, nothing. Blackness swallowed him whole. But death did not come. Instead he woke with a jolt, his body racked with pain. His limbs were bound, his claws useless against the restraints. He was alive. Barely. The human had not killed him. What? Through the pounding in his skull, he became aware of voices. Would have been easier to put a round through his skull. Command wants him breathing. He's the last of their leadership we can grab alive. Pause. Shame. Sci's breathing hitched. They should have killed me. He opened his eyes. The escape pod was gone. He was in a cell, a human brig. Cold metal. Low lighting. No windows. And standing before him, his nightmare-given form. The same human soldier. Helmet removed. Eyes sharp. Expression impassive. You should be dead, Sci-Fi rasped. His throat felt like it had been clawed raw. The human tilted his head, considering. So should you. Sci-Fi swallowed hard. You planned this. The human nodded. From the beginning. Sci-Fi's mandibles clicked in disbelief. He coughed violently. Impossible. A Dominion admiral, a veteran of 1,000 conflicts, reduced to a prisoner. I don't understand, he admitted. You should have been wiped out. You had no fleet strong enough to match ours. No technology advanced enough to challenge us. The human's expression darkened. That was your first mistake, he said. Thinking this was a war of fleets and firepower. Sci-Fi's breathing was shallow now. He was afraid. What was it then? The human took a step closer, leaning in. A hunt. And at that moment, Sci-Fi knew the Dominion was already lost. The butchering of the Dominion. By the time Sci-Fi was dragged from his cell, the war was no longer a war. It was an extermination. The once mighty Dominion fleets had been torn apart, their remnants scattered across the void like bones of a dead empire. The humans had done more than win. They had turned the Dominion's own strategies against them. By the time the Vraked military realized what was happening, it was already too late. Entire supply chains had been dismantled overnight. Weapons facilities, erased. Command posts hijacked. The Dominion had been left blind, deaf, and starving. And that was before the hunting began. Human strike teams infiltrated every major Dominion world, targeting high-ranking officials, strategic leaders, and the very infrastructure that held their empire together. They didn't conquer. They executed. No speeches. No negotiations. No prisoners. The Dominion's own generals were found hanging from their banners. And the message was clear. You started this. Now we finish it. The last stand of High Dominion. Sci-Fi stood, broken and shackled, on the bridge of a human warship as they entered orbit over the Dominion's homeworld. He had never seen his people's seat of power from this vantage point. Now he would watch it burn. The human commanders spoke with cold efficiency, issuing orders like executioners preparing the gallows. And then, a final transmission went out. Not a demand for surrender. Not a warning. Just 4 words. Your war is over. And with that, the bombardment began. The end of the Dominion. The High Dominion's palace, the heart of the Vraked Empire, ceased to exist in seconds. The first strike collapsed the great spires. The second buried the council chambers under molten rock. And the third? Turned the entire city into glass. Sci-Fi could do nothing but watch. His empire. His people. Everything he had fought for burning. And beside him the human soldier, expressionless. No triumph. No celebration. Just the cold, merciless stare of a predator who had finished its hunt. You should have killed us all, the human repeated. Sci-Fi's legs gave out. He sank to the floor. And for the first time in his life, he wept. The silence after the storm. Sci-Fi knelt on the cold metal floor, his body trembling. The weight of what he had witnessed, the annihilation of his homeworld, settled deep into his bones. The Dominion was no more. The war had been over before he ever set foot on this ship. He had been a fool to think otherwise. His people were gone. His empire was ash. And the humans? The humans hadn't even celebrated. No triumphant speeches. No parades. Just execution. He turned his eyes upward to the human soldier standing beside him. The same one who had hunted him, who had led him into this nightmare. The man's face was unreadable. Not gloating. Not mocking. Just waiting. For what? Sci-Fi swallowed hard, his mandibles trembling. Why? His voice was hoarse. Why spare me? The human crouched to his level, his expression as cold as deep space. Because you need to see what comes next. Rebuilding from ruin. Days passed. Weeks maybe. Sci-Fi wasn't sure anymore. Time blurred together in his cell aboard the human warship. No torture. No interrogations. Just silence. And then one day he was brought before a screen. What he saw should not have been possible. The Dominion's homeworld, reduced to slag, was now swarming with human ships. Not warships. Construction vessels. Sci-Fi's mandibles twitched in confusion. The humans were rebuilding? Impossible. The Dominion had been a scourge upon the stars, feared for generations. The humans had every right to wipe them from existence. Yet here they were, restoring what they had destroyed. You burned it to the ground, Sci-Fi whispered. And now, you rebuild? The human beside him, his captor, his executioner, nodded. You thought this was extermination, the man said. It wasn't. It was surgery. Sci-Fi turned sharply, eyes burning with confusion. Surgery? The human's gaze hardened. We don't destroy civilizations, he said. We destroy diseases. Sci-Fi felt his breath hitch. You were a plague, the human continued. A parasite feeding off the suffering of weaker races. We cut out the infection. His voice lowered as sharp as a blade. But that doesn't mean your people have to die. Just the ones like you. Sci-Fi's mandibles clenched. And what? You think the survivors will thank you? That they'll just accept this? The human gave a small, almost imperceptible smile. They won't have a choice. The human's true revenge. It took weeks for Sci-Fi to truly understand. The humans had done what no enemy had ever attempted. They hadn't just killed the Dominion. They had rewritten its DNA. Where once stood a brutal, war-hungry empire, the humans had planted the seeds of something new. The survivors, those too weak, too young, or too distant to fight, were being given a choice. Live under the new order, or die with the old one. And one by one they chose life. The Dominion had never known mercy. Never understood compromise. And yet, the humans were forging something entirely new. Not by conquering. Not by ruling. But by breaking them down to their very foundation, and rebuilding them. Sci-Fi had thought the Dominion's strength was in its military, its fleets, its brutality. He had been wrong. The humans had not just won. They had rewritten history. And worst of all, they had done it so effortlessly. A final choice. One day the human soldier entered Sci-Fi's cell for the last time. No restraints. No guards. Just the two of them. You have a decision to make, the human said. Sci-Fi sat up slowly, glaring. You're offering me a choice? The human nodded. You can stay here in this cell until you rot. Pause. Or you can help us rebuild. Sci-Fi's mandibles twitched. Help you. The soldier leaned in. You know the Dominion better than anyone. You know its weaknesses, its failures. You could help make something better. Sci-Fi let out a bitter laugh. Help the species that hunted mine to the brink of extinction? You expect me to betray everything I fought for? The human's expression didn't change. You already lost everything you fought for, he said simply. The only question left is what you do next. Silence. Sci-Fi's claws tightened into fists. He hated this human. He hated all of them. And yet, the Dominion was gone. The war was over. And the universe would move on, with or without him. He closed his eyes. And when he opened them, he whispered, Tell me what you need me to do. The human smiled. Not in victory. Not in cruelty. Just in understanding. The hunt was over. And the future had just begun. The end. If you enjoyed this HFY story, don't forget to rocket like the video to support more epic HFY content. Loudspeaker comment your favorite moment. What shocked you the most? Fire subscribe for more thrilling HFY sci-fi every week. Bell turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. Humans don't start wars, but they sure know how to end them. Smiling face with horns high voltage.